My name's Ethan Carter, I'm 35 years old, and I live just outside Richmond, Virginia. That day, standing inside the lawyer's office, I watched my family cheer like they'd just won the lottery, which, in a way, they had. My uncle's $22 million estate was being split, and everyone got something glamorous. My brother Jason got a new Tesla and shares of my uncle's real estate company. My cousins, Dylan and Madison, received diamond necklaces, beachfront condos, and stock certificates they didn't even know how to read. Me? I got a moldy old briefcase that smelled like mildew and looked like it had been rescued from a flooded basement. While my cousins counted their millions, I stood there holding the cracked handle of that dusty leather box, pretending it didn't sting. Everyone was laughing. My own mother whispered to my aunt that Uncle Raymond must have lost his mind before he died. But when I found what was hidden inside, I became the only heir who truly understood why Raymond Carter was worth $22 million. Before I tell you my complete story, subscribe and comment where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story travels. The lawyer's office reeked of expensive leather and tension. Mr. Garrison, yes, even the lawyer's name sounded rich, had just finished reading Uncle Raymond's will. The energy in that room was wild. My brother Jason was already on Zillow, comparing which Miami penthouse would be the smartest investment. Dylan bragged about his new Ferrari before the ink was even dry. Even my teenage daughter, Emma, was texting her friends, saying, "My dad's uncle left us something old, maybe it's vintage or collectible." I was the punchline in that office. The briefcase looked pitiful. The leather was split down one side, green mold spotting the corners, brass clasps turned black with corrosion. When I lifted it, the stench of dust and decay made people step back. Jason smirked. "What's in it, bro?" "A bunch of dead rats." My mom, Susan Carter, ever the social perfectionist, tried to play it off. She patted my shoulder with that fake sympathy smile she wore at funerals. "Maybe it's an antique, Ethan. You know how your uncle loved his old junk." She was relieved, I could see it. She'd gotten a $3 million condo in Fort Lauderdale, while I, the only one who actually visited Uncle Raymond every weekend, got this trash. But the truth about my uncle was that nobody expected him to have money. For 40 years, he ran a cramped antique shop in downtown Richmond, the kind of place that looked haunted by history. Dusty shelves, crooked lamps, and clocks that hadn't ticked since the 1950s. He lived upstairs, in a one-bedroom apartment with peeling wallpaper and a fridge older than I was. While my father built a successful construction company and my brother flipped homes, Uncle Raymond spent his weekends at estate sales, examining broken cameras, chipped figurines, and cracked china like they were relics from another world. The family called him Rusty Ray, behind his back, the weird uncle with junk instead of investments. But I knew a different side of him. He was the man who taught me chess on a weathered board missing a rook, who explained how to tell real silver from plated just by the feel. Every Sunday after church, I'd bring him black coffee and a ham sandwich from Davis's Deli, and we'd sit in that cluttered shop surrounded by history. He'd run his fingers over an old pocket watch and say, "See this, Ethan? People think this is junk. But time remembers." 3 weeks before that day in the lawyer's office, Uncle Raymond had died from a sudden heart attack while working in his shop. He was 72. They found him hunched over his desk, magnifying glass still in his hand, studying a coin from World War II. He died the way he lived, surrounded by forgotten stories. At the funeral, my family's grief was shallow. Jason complained about missing a business deal. Dylan answered a call mid-service. My mother cried, but I knew those tears were mostly for show. She hadn't spoken to her brother in 5 years, not since he refused to lend her money for a kitchen remodel. So when Mr. Garrison called about the will reading, everyone assumed Uncle Raymond might have left a few thousand, maybe tied up in junk inventory. Jason even joked on the drive over, "We'll probably have to pay someone to haul that crap out of his shop." Then the lawyer dropped the bomb. Uncle Raymond, the man who drove a rusted '96 Toyota and wore thrift store suits, had died worth $22 million. The room went silent for a second, then chaos exploded. My mother gasped so loud everyone turned. Jason's jaw dropped. Dylan actually screamed, "No way!" And as the numbers rolled in, condos, cars, jewelry, stocks, the laughter turned to greed. When Garrison finally read my name and said, "A briefcase," the silence was suffocating. Every pair of eyes turned toward me. Not pitying, mocking. Uncle Raymond wasn't supposed to be rich. He was supposed to be weird, broke, eccentric. But he'd been collecting stories in the form of antiques, buying history itself, and I was the only one who ever saw that. Still, in that moment, even I wondered if I'd misunderstood him all along. That briefcase in my hand felt like an insult. And yet, somewhere inside, a voice whispered that maybe this was one of his lessons. Something told me not to throw it away. When I got home that evening, the briefcase sat on my kitchen counter like a cruel joke. My wife, Grace, wrinkled her nose as soon as she saw it. "Ethan, is that the thing everyone was talking about?" she asked. "Yeah," I said flatly. "That's the $1 million heirloom." She leaned closer, then pulled back instantly. "It smells like the Civil War." I laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. I opened the clasps, half expecting to find something inside, anything. But it was worse than I thought. The lining was torn, the leather warped from water damage. Inside were yellowed receipts, some photographs that had faded to near white, and a handful of rusted paper clips. Grace sighed. "Maybe it's symbolic? You know how your uncle was." My daughter, Emma, peeked over my shoulder. "Maybe there's a secret compartment," she said, smiling hopefully. My 16-year-old son, Luke, poked the lining with a pencil. "Yeah, or a family curse." Grace shot him a look. "Don't joke about that." But their reaction said it all, disappointment. Even they couldn't hide it. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat alone in the garage under the flickering light. The briefcase sat open on the workbench, mocking me. My phone buzzed every few minutes, texts from Jason and Dylan, rubbing their fortunes in my face. Jason sent a photo of his new condo view with the caption, "Guess Uncle Ray finally did something right." Dylan posted a video on Instagram showing off his new sports car, tagging me with #FamilyFortune. Even my mother called. "Sweetheart, I'm so sorry about what happened today," she said, though her tone was smug beneath the words. "But, you know, maybe Uncle Raymond didn't think you needed money. You have a steady job." "Yeah, a steady job teaching history to teenagers who thought the past began with TikTok." When the call stopped, the silence felt heavier than ever. I glanced at the briefcase again. The moldy fabric, the cracked leather. My uncle's last gift. Had I been wrong about him? For years, everyone laughed at Rusty Ray. But not me. I saw something in the way he talked about history, like every object had a soul. He once told me, "Ethan, people judge things by how shiny they look. But I've spent my whole life finding treasure in the dust." And he had. He'd spend weekends combing through estate sales and yard auctions. He'd come back with things that looked worthless, a chipped teacup, a faded photograph, an old compass, and then tell me the story behind them. He taught me how to spot authentic pieces, check the screws, not the shine, he said. Machines lie. Age doesn't. I didn't realize then that he wasn't just teaching me about antiques, he was teaching me about people. When my parents divorced, Uncle Ray's antique shop became my refuge. Every Sunday, I'd sit beside him as he cataloged new finds. "History doesn't live in books," he'd say, rubbing dust from a brass candlestick. "It lives here. In the things people leave behind." He'd sip his black coffee, no sugar, no cream, same every time, and tell stories that sounded like folklore. Sometimes, when the afternoon sun hit the shop just right, I'd imagine we were inside a time capsule. My mother never approved of those visits. "Raymond's a hoarder, not a historian," she'd say. "You're wasting your weekends." But I didn't care. He never had kids of his own, and I always felt like he saw me as the one person who actually listened. Which is why the will hit so hard. He left everyone else millions, and left me this. Grace found me in the garage again 2 nights later, sitting with the briefcase open like it might suddenly explain itself. "You haven't slept," she said softly. "I just keep thinking there's a reason," I murmured. "Uncle Ray never did anything by accident. He must have known what he was doing." Grace took a deep breath and knelt beside me. "You said he was meticulous, right? Then look at this thing like he would. Not like a disappointed heir. Like his student." That clicked. I grabbed my old magnifying glass, the same one Uncle Ray gave me when I was 16, and began examining the seams. The stitching wasn't uniform. Some areas were newer. Different thread color, darker, stronger. Something was off. Carefully, I pressed along the lining, feeling for thickness or unevenness. My fingers stopped at one corner, the fabric felt doubled, like there was something beneath. I turned on my desk lamp and saw it, faint, newer stitching hidden under a fold. My pulse quickened. Grace handed me a small knife. "Be careful," she whispered. I cut the seam slowly, following the new stitches until the fabric peeled back, revealing a narrow compartment hidden inside the wall of the briefcase. Grace gasped. "Ethan." Inside was a small envelope and something wrapped tightly in oilcloth. The envelope was yellowed but intact. My uncle's shaky handwriting covered the front. "For Ethan. If you're reading this, you found it." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a folded letter. The ink was faded, but the words hit like lightning. "Ethan, you found what everyone else would have thrown away. Good. This briefcase once belonged to a World War II intelligence officer named Stanley Rohr. What's inside is the reason I could retire a millionaire, and why I'm giving you something worth far more than money." The key in this package opens a safety deposit box in Bern, Switzerland. The account number is inside the journal. This wasn't part of my estate, it belonged to the briefcase. And now, it belongs to you. Remember what I taught you, the real treasure is never what's on the surface. Grace covered her mouth. Oh my God. I slowly unwrapped the oilcloth. Inside was a small leather journal and a brass key, shining despite its age. The first page of the journal read, in neat cursive. Account 447 to 891, Schweizerische National Bank, Bern. I stared at it in disbelief. Grace whispered, "Is that a Swiss bank account?" My throat went dry. From World War II. For the first time in days, the briefcase didn't feel worthless. It felt alive. And suddenly, I understood, this wasn't a curse. It was a test. Grace and I didn't sleep that night. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft tap of rain against the windows. The briefcase sat on the kitchen table between us, its smell still lingering in the air, a strange mix of age and revelation. Grace held the journal like it was something sacred. "This could change everything," she whispered. "I don't even know if it's real," I said. My hands were still shaking. A Swiss bank account from World War II? That sounds like a movie plot. She flipped open the journal carefully. The pages were filled with my uncle's tidy handwriting, dates, locations, and lists of transactions. But woven between those notes were paragraphs written in a different pen, older, tighter. It didn't take long to realize what they were. They were research notes. Uncle Raymond had spent years investigating this man, Captain Stanley Rohr, an intelligence officer stationed in Switzerland during the war. There were clippings glued to the pages, an obituary, an article about lost artwork, and something else that made Grace's hand freeze mid-turn, a receipt from a 1976 estate sale in Philadelphia. At the bottom, written in my uncle's handwriting, was a note. Purchase briefcase for $12. Contents unknown. Grace looked up at me. "This is where he got it." "Yeah," I said slowly, connecting the dots. Rohr died without family. His belongings were auctioned off. Uncle Ray must have bought this briefcase and found something inside. I flipped a few more pages. There were photos taped in, old, grainy black and whites of a young man in uniform. Beneath one, my uncle had written, "Stanley Rohr, OSS officer, assigned to repatriate stolen art." That's when it clicked. Rohr wasn't just some soldier. He worked in intelligence. He handled Nazi-looted treasures, gold, artwork, bonds, artifacts, stuff that disappeared after the war. Grace's voice trembled. "You don't think?" I nodded. If Rohr opened a Swiss account to store what he recovered and never reported it, that money could have just stayed there. My pulse raced as the reality sank in. Uncle Ray had found something no one else would have even recognized. He discovered a forgotten fortune. And then, instead of cashing it all for himself, he'd built his wealth quietly, using a fraction of it, and left the rest behind, hidden in a briefcase, waiting for someone who would understand. The kind of person who wouldn't throw it away. Grace gripped my arm. "You have to call the lawyer." I hesitated. "At midnight?" She frowned. "You think this can wait till morning?" She was right. I called Mr. Garrison at home. He answered groggily, clearly irritated, until I said the word Swiss bank account. There was a long pause. Then, in a low, serious tone, he said, "Ethan, listen carefully. Do not tell anyone else about this. Not your brother, not your mother, no one. Bring everything to my office at 9 a.m. sharp. I'll make some calls before then." Grace and I stayed up all night reading. Uncle Ray's notes detailed 5 years of investigation into Rohr's service record. He'd tracked down old unit members, searched government archives, even flown to Switzerland in 1981 to verify the account existed. There were bank statements, one small withdrawal in 1995, enough to buy his building and start his investments. That's how he built his $22 million empire, not through luck, but through history itself. Grace shook her head in disbelief. He turned a piece of the past into a legacy. When dawn broke, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, pride. Uncle Ray wasn't the family fool. He was the only one who ever understood the real value of things. At 8:59 a.m., I stood outside Garrison's office, clutching the briefcase like a lifeline. He greeted me with that polite, controlled expression lawyers have when they're trying not to show excitement. After examining the documents, he made a few international calls. His voice changed from skeptical to stunned. Finally, he looked up and said, "Mr. Carter, the account exists." I froze. "What? It's real. Dormant since 1995, just as your uncle's notes indicated. The Swiss National Bank confirmed its authenticity, but they won't discuss the balance. You'll have to go there in person with the original key." Grace's words echoed in my mind. This could change everything. I leaned forward. Is it legal for me to access it? He nodded slowly. Yes. Because your uncle never included it in his estate, it isn't part of probate. It's considered an asset within the gifted property, the briefcase. That means it belongs solely to you. I exhaled shakily. So this is mine? He smiled faintly. Legally, yes. But you'll have to fly to Switzerland to confirm its contents. That night, I booked a flight I could barely afford, $3,000 on a credit card I didn't want to use. Grace hugged me at the airport 2 days later, her voice trembling. Don't let your family find out yet. Not until you know what's in there. The flight felt endless. Every hour that passed, my anxiety grew. What if it was nothing? What if I'd misunderstood everything? But when I landed in Bern, standing before the marble facade of the Swiss National Bank, I knew I was standing where my uncle once stood, decades ago. Inside, I met with Mr. Brenner, the account manager. Perfectly pressed suit, precise English, no emotion. He examined my passport, the letter, and the key under a magnifying glass. Then he called someone in German, his voice clipped, serious. This account, he said finally, has been dormant for 79 years. There was one verified withdrawal in 1995. You understand, we must be absolutely certain of your claim. 2 hours later, he led me into a private room paneled in dark wood. On the table sat a metal safety deposit box and a folder of documents. Mr. Brenner placed his hand on the box. Mr. Carter, this is what your uncle left you. He stepped back, allowing me to insert the key. It turned smoothly. Inside were stacks of bearer bonds, dated 1945, and one smaller envelope addressed to whoever discovers this. Brenner adjusted his glasses. These bonds alone, with compounded interest, are worth approximately $14 million. The room spun. 14 million. I felt the air leave my lungs. I'd spent my whole adult life scraping by on a teacher's salary, and now I was sitting across from generational wealth born from history itself. But what stunned me most wasn't the money. It was the letter inside that box. And the name at the bottom wasn't my uncle's. It was Captain Stanley Rohr. The letter was old but perfectly preserved, written in steady, formal handwriting across yellowed paper. At the top, dated January 1946, 1 month before Captain Stanley Rohr's death. To whoever finds this, these bonds were payment for the recovery of stolen artwork taken by Nazi collectors during the war. The paintings were returned to their rightful Jewish families in France and Poland. My commanding officers were killed before the payment could be reported to military intelligence. The account in Bern was opened under my name for safekeeping. I intended to use it for post-war intelligence operations, but if you're reading this, then I never made it home. This money belongs to no government, no army, and no heirs. It belongs to history. Use it to make history better. I stared at the words until they blurred. Rohr hadn't hidden stolen money. He'd hidden atonement. Mr. Brenner, the banker, cleared his throat softly. There's more, he said, handing me a second envelope, thinner, newer. This one was added later, in 1995. I recognized the handwriting immediately, my uncle's. Ethan. If you're reading this, it means you found what everyone else would have thrown away. You're the only one who truly saw me, who looked deeper when everyone else laughed. I withdrew only a fraction of this money to build my shop and invest modestly. The rest I left here, waiting for you. I didn't give your brother and cousins money because money was all they ever saw in life. I gave you a test, one I knew you'd pass. The briefcase isn't a joke, it's a mirror. Most people would see mold and garbage. You saw possibility. What's in this box is yours, free and clear. But more importantly, it's your responsibility. Use it to protect what's worth preserving. Raymond. My eyes burned. I sat there in that Swiss vault, silent except for the ticking of the clock, and realized my uncle had never been eccentric, he was deliberate. Every detail, every story, every dusty relic had meaning. Mr. Brenner spoke again. There's also a note from our records. Your uncle visited this bank once, in 1995. He verified the account, withdrew $2 million, and left this letter sealed. He looked at me carefully. He could have taken all of it. But he didn't. I nodded slowly. Because he wanted me to find it. Brenner closed the file. Then he must have known you were the only one who'd understand. I stayed in Bern for 2 days, signing documents, verifying my claim, and completing the international tax forms. The process was exhausting, surreal. When the transfer was confirmed, I sat in my hotel room staring out at the snow-covered rooftops of Switzerland. The number was too big to comprehend, $14 million, even after taxes. But it didn't feel like winning the lottery. It felt like inheriting a purpose. On the flight home, I thought about my uncle. About all those Sundays in his shop. About how he'd hold up some worn-down piece of silver and whisper, "The treasure is never what you see first." He'd built his fortune on that belief, and now, he'd built my future on it too. Grace was waiting at the airport, eyes red, smiling through tears. I told her everything as we sat in the car outside the terminal. When I mentioned the letter, she covered her mouth and whispered, "He didn't leave you money, Ethan. He left you proof that you were the only one who ever really saw him." We both cried then, right there in the parking lot. For a week, we kept the secret between us. But secrets in families like mine don't last long. When I invited everyone over for a family meeting, they assumed I was going to ask for help. Jason arrived first, grinning like a shark. My mother wore new diamond earrings. Dylan parked his Lamborghini half on my lawn. They expected weakness, pity, maybe a plea. Instead, I laid out a folder of Swiss bank documents on the kitchen table. Jason frowned. "What's that?" I smiled. "My inheritance." The silence that followed was the most satisfying moment of my life. I told them everything, the briefcase, the letters, the history. My mother's hand shook so badly she nearly dropped her glass. Jason's jaw locked tight. Dylan just muttered, "You're lying." I pushed the official documents toward them. $14 million. Verified. Legal. Uncle Ray left it to me through the briefcase. Jason's face turned red. "You can't just, that's not fair. He left you garbage." I leaned forward. "You all laughed. You mocked him. You mocked me. But that garbage turned out to be worth more than everything you got combined." My mother tried to guilt me. "Ethan, family shares. We support each other." "Uncle Ray did support you," I said calmly. "He gave you $3 million. He gave me a lesson. And I passed it." When she reached for the folder, I closed it. "You all saw the briefcase and laughed. He knew you would. That was his final test, to see who could look past appearances. They left angry, humiliated, and jealous, but I didn't care. For once in my life, I didn't need their approval. That night, I placed the briefcase back on my desk, cleaned and preserved, but still scarred by time. Grace ran her fingers over it. "What will you do with the money?" I smiled. Something Ray would have believed in. 3 months later, the Raymond Carter Foundation for Historical Restoration opened its doors, a scholarship fund for students who wanted to study trades like antique repair, woodworking, and historical preservation. Jason called it stupid charity. Dylan said it was a waste. My mother told people I'd lost my mind. But when I handed the first scholarship check to Marcus Johnson, a 19-year-old from Richmond who wanted to become a museum curator, I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a kid in that cluttered shop, peace. Raymond had been right all along. The real treasure isn't money. It's what you do with it. 6 months later, I stood on the stage of a small auditorium inside the Richmond Museum of History, staring out at rows of students, teachers, and donors. Behind me, on a pedestal under soft lighting, sat the same battered leather briefcase that started it all, still moldy, still scarred, still perfect. The plaque beneath it read, "The briefcase that taught me to look deeper." I stepped up to the microphone. "My uncle, Raymond Carter, ran a little antique shop on Broad Street," I began. Most people thought he was odd. A man who spent his life surrounded by dust and junk. But what they didn't see was that he was surrounded by stories. He taught me that history isn't trapped in books, it's alive, in the things people leave behind. The audience listened in silence. Some smiled, others nodded quietly. I smiled too, feeling the warmth of it all. That briefcase was almost thrown away. Everyone thought it was worthless. But my uncle believed there's always value beneath the surface, if you care enough to look. That's why this foundation exists. To help others preserve what matters. The applause that followed wasn't loud or wild, it was the kind that felt earned. Real. After the ceremony, a young student approached me, a shy kid named Marcus, the first recipient of the Raymond Carter Scholarship. He held out a small wrapped box. "Mr. Carter," he said nervously, "I wanted to give you this. It's not much, but I restored it myself." I unwrapped it carefully. Inside was an old brass compass, polished until it gleamed. My throat tightened. "This looks exactly like one my uncle used to have." He smiled. "That's because it was his. It came from his shop's estate sale. I bought it last month." For a moment, I couldn't speak. It felt like the universe was closing a loop, one story ending, another beginning. That night, I went home, made myself a cup of black coffee, and sat in my study. The briefcase rested inside a glass display case that cost more than my first car. Sometimes people asked why I'd spend that much protecting something so ugly. I'd smile and tell them the truth, because that ugly thing changed my life. My son Luke thinks I should write a book. Emma jokes that Hollywood will probably call soon. Grace just smiles and says, "You already wrote your story, Ethan, you just had to live it first." She's right. Uncle Ray's voice still echoes in my mind sometimes. The treasure is never what you see first, kid. It's always what you almost overlook. He was talking about antiques back then. But now, I realize he was really talking about people. He saw the world through a lens most of us forget to use, the one that measures worth not by wealth or shine, but by soul. That's what the Raymond Carter Foundation is built on. We've restored more than 300 artifacts since opening. Funded dozens of students. Helped rebuild historical homes in rural Virginia that were slated for demolition. Every piece tells a story. Every restoration brings a fragment of the past back to life. Sometimes I still visit Uncle Ray's grave on Sunday mornings, just like I used to visit his shop. I bring him a coffee, black, no sugar, no cream, and sit quietly for a while. I tell him about the students we've helped, about how Marcus is now studying museum curation at Georgetown, about how the foundation is expanding to include scholarships for art restoration. And sometimes, when the wind moves through the trees, I swear I can almost hear him say, "Good job, Ethan. You finally learned what I was trying to teach you." I smile every time. Because now I know. The real inheritance was never the money. It was the lesson he left behind. That true value doesn't glitter. It grows quietly in the things and people we almost overlook. And every time I pass that old briefcase, I remember. The real treasure is never what's on the surface. You just have to look deeper. If this story touched you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below about a time when you chose truth over comfort.